Hey guys, welcome to UFC Betting Edge, and today we'll be talking about the UFC card headlined by Alistair Overeem and Alexander Volkov. Um, Before we get into that, the stock markets have been pretty crazy through the last week and the week before. We saw for the first time when retail investors came together and challenged a big hedge funds and were able to, create a big dent in Melvin Capital and Citadel's balance sheets. I don't know how it's going to pan out considering the fact that GME, AMC, and the other stocks at Wall Street Bets have been, plunging today. But it was a good start. The sad part is that now the regulatory bodies and all these hedge funds are going to take more drastic measures to ensure that this will not be repeated. We'll see how it goes, but something that I was proud of. I bought some stocks, kept them to show my solidarity towards my fellow retail investors. Please comment. Did you buy any stocks? What did you feel about it? Please comment below. Now, talking about the UFC card, this is a pretty interesting card, stacked from top to bottom. Main event is going to be fun. My favorite fight is going to be Diego Ferreira versus Beneil Dariush, two dark horses fighting each other. Frankie Edgar versus Cody Sanhagen is going to be awesome. Then Justin James and Devontae Smith is going to be some fireworks. Michael Johnson versus Clay Guida is going to be good. Yusuf Zalal and Ode Osbourne are fighting. Those two fighters are on my radar, so we'll see how it goes. Anyways, let's talk about the first fight on the main card, So let's dive into the first fight of the main card. Diego Ferreira versus Beneil Dariush. Now, Ferreira is primarily a third-degree jiu-jitsu black belt who has a stellar 17-2 record, with his two losses coming to Dustin Poirier and Beneil Dariush. They fought in 2015, where Dariush edged it on the feet and took Ferreira down to control him to win a unanimous decision. Worth noting here is that Diego Ferreira took the fight on only 2 weeks' notice. Ferreira is 5'9" with a 74-inch reach, which is as long as McGregor's. He lands about 5.1 strikes a minute with a lower accuracy of about 36%. It also means that with lower accuracy, he throws a lot of strikes. He keeps throwing punches and jabs than most lightweights. He absorbs over 3.1 strikes a minute, and he defends about 61% of the strikes thrown at him. So his defense is really good. From a very basic striker in 2015, when he fought Poirier and Beneil Dariush, he has come a long way, where he weathered the first round against the seasoned striker in Mairbek Taisimov, and then he kept pressuring him until he pretty much broke Taisimov and started dominating the fight. And he did that without having a single takedown, which is his bread and butter. He threw non-stop combinations with 330 strikes in 15 minutes. Ferreira switches his stances effortlessly and attacks with jabs, follows up with powerful right, and he dips his head while throwing a punch, and he lands a roundhouse kick with the landing percentage of that roundhouse kick is extremely high. He is like Max Holloway to a fair bit, where his output keeps increasing as the fight goes on. The reason that he keeps pressuring people is that he's not afraid of being taken down, being such a skilled jiu-jitsu guy. However, in this fight with Beneil Dariush, the dynamics are not the same, and he might want to throw a little caution to the wind because Beneil can control him from the top. Ferreira's takedown defense is 70%. So he has to ensure that he defends much higher percentage of takedown to ensure that Dariush doesn't win the same way he did in 2015. Now, talking about Dariush, he's also a top-level grappler with a ton of finishes. However, off late, most of his finishes have come by knockouts. I think last four of his 5 fights have come by knockouts, and he's got 3 performance bonuses in those fights. If you look at the last 2 fights of Dariush, he finished Drakkar Klose and Scott Holtzman, 2 fighters that had never been finished previously. So that's a big feather in Dariush's cap. Dariush is 5'10" with 72-inch reach, and he lands just under 4 strikes a minute with an accuracy of 49%. So what it means is he is much more accurate than Ferreira, but throws much less. He absorbs just over 2.6 strikes a minute with a 59% defense, which is pretty good. And if Dariush has a little weakness, it's about his tendency to get into a firefight, which has made him a little vulnerable, especially against his fight against Drakkar Klose. He ended up winning it, but he had to go through some adversity there. Dariush throws power punches from a southpaw stance, and he has a devastating body kick. So he should capitalize by throwing hooks and body kicks on Ferreira, who usually fights in the orthodox stance. He's definitely adding new wrinkles to his striking, and if you saw the devastating spinning back elbow / punch, that was a work of art. Dariush's energy management can be a little suspect at times, especially in a Drakkar Klose fight and even the Scott Holtzman fight, where he just goes berserk, and especially against a fighter like Ferreira, who is known for his cardio. Now, to summarize this, both fighters are top-level grapplers, and they have been adding new tricks to their arsenal. From their first fight in 2015, I have seen improvements in both the fighters, where Dariush is 5-1 in his last 6, and Ferreira is 6-0. The fight can go like the last time, where Dariush dominated with wrestling. However, in the last fight, Ferreira had just joined his new training camp and with Fortis MMA, and was still pretty green. I think he's made a lot of improvements since then. He's got a much better gas tank now. His striking is so much crisp. So that's the little X factor there. I'd probably give the chin advantage to Ferreira, and strength and power advantage to Dariush. My odds for this fight is 50-50, so minus 110 for both fighters. If you put gun to my head, I'd probably say Ferreira by making more improvements. Last time we saw him was more than a year ago, which means a fairly long layoff, but it also means he had a chance to improve more too. Now, looking at the odds are by Bet365 is pretty much in line with mine. Where I see some value is the fight going to a distance. Both fighters have really good chins, and that means ending the fight might be harder. They also have good grappling skills, and they're aware of what the other person is throwing in terms of submissions. So I'd probably say this fight going to a distance might be a good pick here. Next fight on the cards is in the bantamweight division, where Cody Stamann is fighting Askar. Talking about Stamann, he's a big athletic bantamweight who has been extremely active in 2020. His last fight was against Jimmy Rivera, where he lost a decision where Jimmy Rivera mixed his takedowns and striking to win a fairly close decision. Prior to that, he decisioned Brian Kelleher, who's really scrappy. He's fought Aljamain Sterling and other top bantamweights. So he'll be coming into this fight with huge experience advantage. He has traditional martial arts background. He's also won Golden Gloves, and he has a decorated collegiate wrestling career as well. Stamann throws punches and combinations to set up his takedowns. Opponents that are reckless in their approach can find them on their back real quick. Stamann usually fights in the orthodox, but his left kicks and his left hooks are the most powerful weapons, and that's Askar should be careful about. As good Stamann's takedowns are, he sometimes struggles to keep the opponents onto the ground, and something that Askar can capitalize on. Now, talking about Askar, he's a Chicago-based prospect who is 10-1 in his career and is getting a short notice UFC opportunity when Andre Ewell pulled out of his fight against Stamann. This will be a huge step up for Askar in competition. Askar stands 5'7" and has a 70-inch reach. He'll probably be the slightly taller guy in this fight with slightly longer reach. Askar pressures his opponent moving forward towards them and matches their intensity a little bit. If the opponent is throwing one-off strikes, he throws one-off strikes, but he is also not afraid to get in the pocket and go for berserkers. Skill-wise, he seems to have nice, crisp striking, where he jabs his way to get in the range and attacks with overhead right or uppercuts to hurt his opponents. The problem he has is that he throws one strike at a time. He doesn't throw a lot of combinations unless it's like crazy punching in the pocket. Mean that he won't be able to get Cody Stamann worked up and tired. He mixes his takedowns with strikes and has good success in landing them. He has also shown attacks from his back, but he's not really a huge submission threat. Now, to summarize this fight, it's going to be a hard debut for Askar. He's going against a fighter who is stronger, has more experience, probably has higher volume and better wrestling. Had Askar, if Askar had one-punch knockout power, it could have been a tighter matchup. Or if he threw a lot of volume, that could have changed things. But considering the fact that his volume is not that high, plus he's not a one-punch knockout artist, I think it's a pretty safe bet to bet on Cody Stamann. However, when you look at the odds, all this is already factored in Bet365, where Stamann is minus 450 favorite. Now, I don't really have a lot of problem with that. However, I consider that Askar has a fair bit of skills everywhere that he can take this fight to a decision. And I probably wouldn't put that high of a price tag on Stamann. For this fight, I think Cody Stamann by decision could be a pretty good bet, as my odds and Bet365 odds are pretty close. I think that'd probably be a good bet. Next fight on the card is in flyweight division, where Alejandro Pantoja is fighting Beneil. Now, Beneil is making his UFC debut and is a really, really exciting fighter. If you haven't seen his fights, please go watch them. And it's not just the fights, it's everything else that he brings with it. So let's talk about Pantoja first. Pantoja's hands are ever evolving, and he is a really high output striker. He's fought current flyweight king in Figueiredo, and that was a 3-round barn burner. Pantoja definitely has the jiu-jitsu and submission edge, but I slightly lean towards Cape when it comes to wrestling. He is probably the top 3 skilled guys in the flyweight division who have an impressive all-round game. Pantoja looked fairly tired in the second and the third round with Askar Askarov when there were a lot of wrestling exchanges. Something to be careful about if we are looking to bet on Pantoja. To be fair enough, he still had power when he was going for his punches against Askarov, but he definitely looked gassed and dejected. So what it means is he doesn't particularly do too well against really good wrestlers who have good jiu-jitsu game as well. He seems to get tired in wrestling transitions, and the same thing happened in his fight against Dustin Ortiz, which he ended up losing by decision. Now, talking about Manel Cape. Manel Cape is a Portuguese fighter and is something else both in and off the cage. His theatrics are pretty crazy. He kisses his opponents during a fight. He poses for the camera in the middle of transition or throwing punches. He taunts his opponents after getting knocked down, and the list goes on. If you like a little bit of drama in a fight, you need to see this guy fight. I'm not kidding. This is one of the highest levels of drama that you can see in a fight, and Colby might feel a little mellow as compared to this guy. He usually fights in the 135 pounds, so he might be the bigger guy in the cage, but we'll have to see how his cardio and his chin holds up, considering that he'll be making this cut. He's much less experienced, but the quality of opponents is as good as you can get outside of the UFC. He's knocked out Mizugaki, had a great fight with Kyoji Hiraguchi, even though he was submitted in the third round. He pretty much has a complete game. He's athletic, he's extremely wild in his approach, he fights technical in patches with a lot of head movement, and that too with a lot of swagger. He has good wrestling and looks to mix things up and will try to dominate wherever he can. He also tends to go for takedowns when he gets hurt. He does get hurt in his fights, especially against Hiraguchi, where he was dropped at least like 1,000,000 times, but he wasn't getting knocked out. He was eventually finished through a submission, but he has a great chin. If this fight stays standing, I'd say it's a 50-50 fight, but I definitely see submission advantage for Pantoja. And he'd ideally like a takedown early when Cape is being reckless and throwing loopy punches. If there are too many wrestling exchanges where Pantoja cannot exert his dominance, the tide could easily turn towards Cape for the reasons that I stated earlier. Gun to my head, I say Pantoja by submission just because Manel Cape presents opportunities that Pantoja can exploit. If we look at the odds, my odds and Bet365 odds are fairly close. I would say that Bet365 gives a higher percentage of chance of this fight being finished, and I feel that both fighters have really good chins, so there might be a higher chance of this fight going to the decision, but there's always an outside chance of Pantoja getting the submission. So I would probably some money on Pantoja by submission, not Pantoja by finish, but by submission. Okay, now the co-main event, and this is going to be an exciting fight. Cody Sanhagen is taking Frankie Edgar. Both fighters are coming off of wins. Sanhagen has looked really impressive off late. So starting with Sanhagen, he's probably coming back from the best finish of his career where he wheel kicked Marlon Moraes and finished him later on the ground. This was his first main event, and the opponent was a really high profile fighter. So considering all those things, Sanhagen looked really impressive. He showed a variety of strikes in an arsenal, and his striking was seamless. He switches stances fluidly, throws whippy strikes, and they are extremely effective. He's 5'10" with a 70-inch reach, and he will utilize his stance switching to cover distance and nullify Frankie's movement-based game. Sanhagen distributes his attack to head, body, and legs, and this is great as it keeps the opponent guessing. But I also feel that in close fights, this might work against him if the opponent has a lot more strikes to the head and Sanhagen shows damage on the head. Something similar happened in Edgar Munoz's fight, where Edgar was the guy that hit the face and Munoz hit all around the body, and Munoz ended up losing the decision. Sanhagen has two very different kind of showings on the ground, one against Assunção and the other against Sterling. With Assunção, he showed great situational and transitional awareness against a jiu-jitsu black belt, but with Sterling, who has wrestling and jiu-jitsu, he did not look effective at all and got submitted within 2.5 minutes. Now, coming to Frankie Edgar. Frankie is also coming out of a win in a hard-fought fight where he decisioned Pedro Munoz, as we just talked about. That 5-round fight was a barn burner. If you haven't watched that, I recommend please go and watch it. Frankie is fast and moves around a lot. He might have a speed advantage here, but Sanhagen can neutralize that with his length, reach, and switching of stances. Frankie throws punches and bunches, and it can actually sway judges, even if he's not landing at the same clip. Frankie eats a lot of leg kicks, and Sanhagen throws them well. However, based on historical evidence, Frankie does take leg kicks really well. He doesn't really show a lot of effect. He went through 5 rounds with Pedro Munoz, where Pedro Munoz just chopped at his legs, but Frankie was still moving fine in the 5th round. Now, to summarize this, on feet, Sanhagen has the diversity of attacks and advanced footwork. The highlight of his footwork is switching stances effortlessly. Frankie has pace, and his highlight of his footwork is movement, keeping the opponent guessing, coming in and out, and hitting jabs and straights. However, if Frankie is not able to keep this fight on the ground for extended periods of time, I see Sanhagen winning this fight fairly easily. Sanhagen's takedown defense is a little suspect, and I doubt he can stuff Frankie's takedowns 100% of the time. I think that the fight will go to the ground more than once, and Frankie will fancy himself in thwarting Sanhagen's jiu-jitsu from his back. Frankie lands brutal ground and pound, and that could make him susceptible to subs, but Frankie's situational and positional awareness are pretty good, so I back him not getting submitted while he's ground and pounding. Sanhagen is still young and making a lot of improvements, so we might see that Sanhagen could submit Frankie, but based on what I've seen so far, I see it unlikely. As I mentioned, the ground game that Sanhagen displayed with Assunção was really good, and he made sure that Assunção didn't have a dominant position for a long time. Now, in Sterling fight, Sanhagen showed some holes in his game, but knowing the kind of competitor Sanhagen is, I think he is going to grow, and he might be able to win this fight. However, what makes this fight the most interesting are the odds, or I should say, what makes the betting on this fight the most interesting is the odds, where my odds are extreme, are fairly different from Bet365, where Bet365 is saying that it's probably going to be a clear-cut victory for Cody Sanhagen. This might totally happen, but I don't know. How can you discount Frankie Edgar, who's handled much bigger opponents, who beat up Yair Rodriguez and finished him at the end of second round? I feel Frankie still has a chance, and with his takedown and experience, he can make a good fight out of this. Now, even though I feel that Cody Sanhagen might win the fight, I think betting on Frankie straight or betting on him to win a decision might just be a good bet. There's huge value, in my opinion, and I have actually bet on Frankie Edgar straight. So now the main event of the evening in the heavyweight division, where Alistair Overeem is fighting Alexander Volkov. Now these two are giants, 6'5" and 6'7". Both have 80-inch reach. It's going to be an exciting fight. Let's talk about Overeem first. His last 8 fights, he's 5-3 with 4 knockout wins. He's knocked out Augusto Sakai, Walt Harris, Alexei Olenek, and Sergey Pavlovich. He also had a decision win over Fabricio Verdum. His 3 knockout losses has been against Jairzinho Rozenstruik, Curtis Blades, and Francis Ngannou. Last 5 fights, he's 4-1, and he could easily been a 5-0 if he hadn't been finished by Rozenstruik in the last second of the 5th round. He's definitely coming in with a lot of momentum with 2 knockout victories. He mixed his takedowns with his striking game and was able to come from behind pretty much in both fights against Augusto Sakai and Walt Harris. Now, Overeem is probably the most accurate striker in the UFC with an overall accuracy of 64%. If we look at the last few fights, his striking accuracy is over 70%. So Overeem is definitely conserving his energy, and the whole energy management is much better. Overeem lands just over 3.7 strikes a minute and absorbs just over 2.3 a minute, with a defense of 58%. Overeem is usually cautious early on in the fight, which has been working well to his advantage, except for the Rozenstruik fight. Overeem uses linear blitz to attack and catch his opponents. It could be a really dangerous ploy against Volkov, who throws straight, precise strikes and has a really, really long reach. Overeem counters leg kicks with overhand right really well. However, he shells and backs up when he's attacked. He still keeps his eyes on the opponent and usually defends really well. However, it's not the best look for him if the fight goes for a decision. Takedowns have been the new addition in his game, and working with the elevation team, training with Curtis Blades, he has taken his last 3 fights to the ground, and he has won. He has shown real good ground and pound. Overeem has good body lock takedowns, and he used them against Rozenstruik and Sakai. However, his double leg takedowns are very telegraphed, and he should not be using it against Volkov, because Volkov can catch him coming in with a knee or an uppercut. Now, talking about Volkov. Volkov is 6'7", huge reach with 80 inches. His last 8 fights, he's been 6-2 with 3 knockout wins and 3 decision wins. He has a decision loss and a knockout loss. He got knockout wins against Walt Harris, Fabricio Verdum, and Stefan Struve. His decision wins came against Greg Hardy, Roy Nelson, and Timothy Johnson. His knockout loss against Derek Lewis was a fight where he was comfortable and winning right up till the end of the 3rd round, where he was knocked out. So his record could have easily been 7-1. Volkov is a really good kickboxer and throws a lot for heavyweight, and usually likes to move forward and pressure his opponents. He throws a lot of stabbing front kicks, and it could be really effective even when Overeem switches his stances, especially when Overeem is fighting in southpaw stance. He used the same technique to hurt Walt Harris and followed it up with a barrage of punches to finish the fight. Volkov also throws a lot of leg kicks, and that might compromise the movement of Overeem. However, it might also increase the threat from takedowns, where Overeem, now training with blades, could utilize those takedowns. Blades landed 14 takedowns on Volkov, but the level of wrestling that Blades has is way higher than Overeem, and I don't really see that happening as often. So to summarize this is Overeem's last opportunity to go on a title run, and he has a really tough opponent in front of him. Volkov has higher output on feet, and he has fairly high accuracy, even though it's lower than Overeem's. I feel Overeem has to take this fight to the ground or to the clinch to make Volkov doubt himself while throwing his strikes with a threat of takedown. With Overeem being Blade's training partner, Volkov knows this and will be better prepared for the takedowns this time around. Overeem has come back from behind in the last two fights against Walt Harris and Augusto Sakai, but they didn't have the same kind of experience, output, and poise that Volkov has, which leads to my prediction. I see Volkov stuffing takedowns and neutralizing the striking attacks and finishing Overeem late in the fight. Now, we look at the odds, and my odds and Bet365 odds are fairly aligned. I think the only part where it differs is that I see some opportunity in this fight finishing. And as I said, Volkov with the finish is probably good value for money. Thanks for watching the video, guys. If you liked it, hit the like button, subscribe, comment. Let me know, what do you think about the fights? Who are you betting on? Or do you see any good bets on the card? Please let me know. I'll see you next Thursday.